Thank you, Mayor and Council. Before I bring up the consultants to talk about the Edge City, I've had a number of questions from council members, the mayor, the community at large about our office market, how things are going. And I think giving you some of that information up front might give you some context for the conversation afterwards. So if you look at Dunwoody's perimeter center market, we have about 8.5 million square feet just in perimeter center. We've got about 21% vacancy in that office market right now. That's very comparable to other areas of the city, of the region, I mean. But at the end of 2023, that's going to go up to about 28% unless we have some large leases. The reason for that is State Farm has 2 large leases. They're actually the original leases they took out when they first moved here, burn off at the end of 2023. They are no longer in that office space right now. So as soon as that happens, our vacancy will go up to about 28%, which is significantly higher than any other area in the region. We can also think about our office market as being bifurcated. If you're close to MARTA, if you're close to amenities, you're doing very well. Campus 244 had 2 of the largest leases in the whole region last year. The further away you are from MARTA, the further you are away from amenities. Most of those office buildings are older, and those are the ones that are really struggling. So as you think about our office market, it really is a tale of 2 different markets. So with that, we should expect some weakening in assessments. That's not always bad. A number of office buildings are being sold. There's been 3 very recently that have closed. They sold for much less than they were valued a year ago. So it's going to impact our valuation, but it's also going to give an opportunity for those new owners to redevelop those sites or reposition those buildings. So it's sort of a good news, bad news. Retail market's doing very good. We have about 3.5 million square feet of retail in the perimeter market, and there's 2.2% vacancy. So basically, our retail market is full. If you look citywide, we have about 10 million square feet of office space, slightly lower vacancy at 19%, and we have about 4.5 million square feet of retail, and that 2.2 is the same citywide. So wanted to have that information before Andrew and Jonathan.
Before Andrew comes up, I just want you to clarify things for people that are maybe at home or in the audience or up here that don't know. The State Farm leases, those are not the new towers, right?
That is correct. Those are the original leases that State Farm took
buildings
10
out
years ago.
when they moved here into existing office buildings. It doesn't impact the 2, well,
Exactly.
the 3
the
towers.
2 buildings that I'm talking about are 64 and 66 perimeter center east, which was across the street from old City Hall. So
Okay.
yes, and they had other leases throughout the market. All of those have burned off, or people have subleased those. These are the only 2, but it's considerable space. It's 2 full office buildings.
Yeah.
So we are certainly looking at some issues. The good news is we think with the Edge City 2.0 vision, this is one of the ways that we solve that long term.
All right. Thank you.
All right. So I'll have Andrew and Jonathan come up. There we go. All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mayor and Council. Again, my name is Andrew Core. I'm a principal at Pond and Company. We've been working on this the past year almost. Before I begin, I want to make sure my colleague, Mr. Fain from MXD can hear us and can speak on the Zoom.
I can hear you, Andrew. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're a little quiet, so just make sure you
Sure. How is that?
Lower. You go the other direction.
How is that? Testing. Little higher?
Yeah, much higher. I don't know if you can do much on yours.
Okay. I'll try and vocalize as much as possible, Andrew.
Yes, lean in. Yeah, lean in. I like how you're leaning in. So that we'll just go with that. So again, first off, I want to say thank you all all of you, I believe, came to the last public presentation in November. Thank you all. That means a lot for a consulting team to show your support as elected officials. That means it's very important. This is the final presentation of this study. And we wanted to kind of the first of the year, a little bit, everyone's a little fresher after the holidays and ready to go through this. So much of the material you have seen before, whether through the presentations or attending public meetings. So I will be brief on some of them, longer on others. Mr. Fain will chime in on some of the return on investment that we'll talk about too, which somewhat newer information, but very good information. And then we'll wrap it up. So I'll be succinct as possible. I want to minimize this if that's okay, so people can see most of the slide. Right now in the bottom corner is kind of where we are, the strategic implementation actions. We've gone through this entire process. This really is just our process slide where we've gone. We've gone through a lot of different iterations to get where we are today, which is great. We're positioning the city for continued success, not just success. You're already being successful. We're positioning for continued success regardless of what's happening in the market. So you're meant to be flexible and nimble. Our last public meeting was in October. I said November, I meant October. Many of you all participated. It was a really good turnout. It was here in this space. Some final engagement takeaways. Again, most of the community members who came were very supportive of the different nodes that we discussed in Edge City, the different areas, and we'll show those again. There's always there were a couple of people just two people who suggested more single family housing, both attached and detached, and that's always going to be flexible in a plan like this. That can be done based on what the market dictates. The 3 catalytic project opportunities were well received. A couple of people have said, hey, we love green space, we love them for our pets, so that's always good. And more people always discussed, hey, we'd love more places to sit, relax, but of course, those are very detailed ideas, but again, good to hear. And people are excited about the opportunities to do alternative modes. People really want to get out and walk. I think they feel hamstrung by kind of the only way I can get around is in my car. I really want to go beyond that. So that was very good to hear. And so this idea of building out a network of green spaces and trails connecting this larger area that we're in today is really going to be beneficial. What you see on the screen is really the summary diagram of Edge City 2.0. Again, if you look at that, what you'll see is the Dunwoody MARTA station with this idea of the urban node in and around, building upon that, just what Michael spoke about before, the success of what's already going on there in terms of the office market and building upon that. Taking advantage of MARTA and mass transit, and then scaling things down as it works towards existing single family residential areas. This is aligned with the stakeholder preference and what we heard. This represents the terminology that we use to talk about the different scales, everything from urban to village and everything in between. We will talk about each of these briefly. We wanted to use common terminology as we discuss different ideas and concepts. So we're going to begin with the urban node. This is the area around the mall, west of Dunwoody in that core area. As you can see, it represents a very unique development mix, still heavy on office, residential and retail. And the focus of that residential mix is really going to be condos, apartments, and stacked flats, but building that density. And the images you see there are meant to be representative of the type of development you'd like to see. So that's where the most intense development is going to be showcased and around that area, taking advantage again of mass transit and the existing office market that's already there and that is successful. As we scale down, we go to an area called city node. That's just the terminology we use. Again, this is actually going to flip to be more of a mix of residential. And then what you're seeing here is townhomes, stacked flats, condominiums, and also age-restricted units. So there's a flex. The goal here is to build a variety of housing types in these different market areas. There's a couple of different ones. One straddles Dunwoody. The other is kind of further north and west to where what we know today is kind of the Bassett and Haverty kind of furniture area. Those areas that are earlier developments, the 1990s and 2000s, over time may see redevelopment. As we scale down further, we move into something that's less dense, what we call the town node. And again, what you see here is really a focus on residential and retail, right? And the retail really focused on those kind of core areas. At places like Ashford Lane, which are already successful as a redevelopment node, building upon that success and making it localized retail so people can walk to those spaces and connect with them. And as Michael mentioned, those existing office complexes, the old State Farm areas and those areas kind of along I-285, these are areas ripe for redevelopment. And finally, the village node, we know this is the Walmart area and the Sproul Arts Center, which is we've just heard about. And so this area, long-term, is looking at, again, more of a mix between residential, some office and retail, but much more low density. And again, the idea of being transitioning because you're backing up to existing residential and you want to have a good scale development over time. Part of this idea here too is as we think about redeveloping this area, we're also introducing new transportation and traffic patterns to make kind of blow out those larger super blocks that we're so used to and make it much more connected. So they're hand in hand when we think about that development style. Quickly by the numbers. And again, this is a 20-year projections. Okay. So first and foremost, we're seeing a large increase in population. That's natural because we're introducing more residential over time. The jobs will increase over time as well. Every number you see here is a net gain. So it's not a replacement of one or the other. Michael talked a little bit about the current office space and then again, raising that. Obviously, in the short term, we're seeing changes in the office space market. But again, this is a 20-year vision and build out. And the retail, we have a lot of retail in this area already. So we're seeing more of it in 20 years, but it's not a radical jump. Over 20 years, we're talking about a net gain of over 1 million square feet. But that's a long-term outlook. Housing by type. We're going, again, increasing the housing units overall, but the important thing to remember too is not are we just increasing the housing type, but diversity, which is we've harped on this a lot. We want a variety of housing types, which currently really don't exist today. It's kind of a binary market, or really focused on garden apartments, and we're going to see a lot of that. We're going to diversify that in this plan, and that's the goal here. Okay, Mr. Fain, if you can lean in, we're going to talk about economic impacts and just give me a shout when you want to change the slides.
Sure thing. Thank you, Andrew Core, and I'll try and project as much as possible and lean in there. There's 3 types of general economic impacts, as we can see here: direct economic effects. So that's really the impacts on the study area and where you see the impacts the most, really. Indirect business impacts are those that would be affected by, say, new construction or new business in the study area. So those indirect impacts may fall in or outside the study area. And then induced business impacts are even further down the line, where jobs may be created because there's new construction activity, new jobs, but then at the same time, there's new positions down the line opened somewhere outside the city of Dunwoody as well. So we really like to focus though on the direct economic effects or impacts as well. And just next slide, Andrew, thank you. To note as well is that we use the InPlan modeling software. So what InPlan does is they aggregate all the economic impacts together using very specific zip code data. So we're actually able to highlight the zip code specifically for the study area and understand what those impacts are. So it's not taking numbers from somewhere else in Atlanta or somewhere else in Georgia or anything like that, but we're really focused in on that specific census type and tax type data for the study area in Dunwoody. And these are some of the types of economic impacts that we would see: the total number of new jobs created, the amount of new income coming out of those jobs, of course, an increase in property values and the property taxes coming out of that, increases of GDP and business output. Some of the items that we wanted to just highlight today, and all these types of impacts will be, of course, in our report. Next slide, Andrew. But there's several that we wanted to highlight that we feel are the most important. Direct employment. Andrew was showing the amount of new office space and employment space, and I believe it was just over 2 million square feet over the next 20 years. Direct employment of and this is over and above what's currently in the area, of 9,700 jobs at full build out. So that'd be primarily within, of course, professional services, whether could be in life sciences, technology, management of companies, whatever that may be, it'd be within those types of jobs. You'd see retail sales taxes, both going to state and county of significant amounts. A very large amount, you could see in the top right there, of the property value created. Again, this is at 1.8 billion at full build out. So that's not today or tomorrow, but over 20 years, if this realization came about of the Edge City 2.0, you'd see close to $2 billion of further property value created. As well, and coming out of that, annual property taxes generated directly to the City of Dunwoody at full build out of over $5.5 million. I also wanted to note as well, very quickly, we don't have it on here, but there's also additional taxes that you see, and a big one is $12.4 million annually to what IMPLAN calls a special district. So that's everything such as school, police, fire, all these special taxation areas that would see additional benefits on an annual basis from this type of development. And the final one I want to touch on is the hotel excise tax going directly to the city of approximately an additional $2 million a year. Next slide, Andrew. The final piece I want to talk about for economic impacts is, what are the positive benefits for the industries as well that would receive this impact? And this is just within, again, the study area itself. And because we'd be introducing, as Andrew Core had shown, so much additional new residential space through whether that's stacked flats, townhomes, condos, apartments, or the like, as well as quite a significant amount of new office and employment space. The economic industry that, of course, would see the most impact is food and beverage. So annually, it could receive upwards of $55 million of additional spending at full build out over the next 20 years. And that, of course, comes from people, stopping to pick up a coffee in the morning or grabbing lunch or going for drinks after work. Or for people who now live in the area, it's going for dinner just with their families, it may be. So a large impact for the local food and beverage industry. Some others, hotels and motels, primarily, of course, hotels in this instance, of nearly $25 million in impact. And that's people coming for business meetings, but also just people coming to visit family in the local area, weddings, funerals, different celebrations and the like. And then, of course, there are impacts for other types of industries, employment services, managements of companies. These would also see impacts of significant value as well. Andrew?
Thank you, Andrew. Mr. Fain. I want to conclude by covering just three initiatives. And in the final plan, we talk about a series of steps that can be taken right now. Again, the goal is to position Dunwoody for continued success. First off is redevelopment facilitation. So one of the ideas to kind of talk about and what we're showing here is kind of leveraging existing infrastructure and available land to create palatable density and walkable spaces. So kind of retrofitting those big block, kind of the big box super block areas and retrofitting them over time. This is a representation of, where a sample big box retrofit, whether it's a Walmart or another property, and how you take that and break it down so it's much more palatable and more human in scale. Currently typical patterns that are out there today, you have large surface lots, deep setbacks, low 1-story, maybe 1.5-story buildings. And so how do you kind of retrofit that, even if you left the original building there, looking at different patterns and then introducing different roadway networks and pedestrian connections in there too. So making that, so that's one kind of idea that we've talked about and kind of shared with the community. This is again, an example. This is the perimeter village concept. So when I talk about the Walmart, where it is today, there's existing big box retail. It's pretty filled in, it's very active, but over time, you may see where you introduce a secondary street and then also another one going south and just kind of breaking up that area, introducing again, the point being, is it going to look like this? Probably not, but the idea is to have diversity in that. So it's not just, large general commercial uses, but it's a mix of things. And you're serving, because it's such a big area, you're serving this node of the community, not just everybody coming in. So it's kind of creates some diversity. Another big thing we heard that a lot of the community members got around, and certainly we heard all from you as well, is kind of prioritize new open space, right? So new open space is challenging in a built out area. You have to be smart how you do that. You're smart through partnerships. You're smart by good programming and good design and zoning and working with developers, and also looking at good opportunities for the city to redevelop properties. What you see in the green there are kind of opportunity areas, just very diagrammatically, where you begin introducing small neighborhood parks, but they're built around the concept of maybe a larger centralized green space that can bring people together, kind of a town green, so to speak. Now, a town green can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. You know, the town green in Swanee is going to look different than the one in Smyrna. But the goal is that it brings people together and it creates a vibrant activity beyond the 9 to 5. One of the ideas here too is, as we think about this open space, is that it's connected to a series of bicycle paths, walking trails, and networks. So you can walk between these areas, and the open space serves the areas they're trying to function. And so you're not relying on one space to do everything, but you're kind of breaking that down. So we think it's a great opportunity and something to continue looking at and thinking about as this area develops over the next 20 years, and taking advantage of what you already have, right? You already have some areas that are of interest that you want to build upon. This is the idea of the central green space concept. Again, one example was the parking lot in front of the facing Ashford Dunwoody, in front of the mall, and activating that space. You'll know that area today where they have some already activated spaces in front of the restaurants. It's that parking lot in front where you can really activate that entire area. It has a front door now for the city as you come in on Ashford Dunwoody, taking advantage of that road, but also kind of leveraging the adjacent density around it, what's going on in the potential development over time. So really making it a walkable, vibrant space that can be connected from all areas. And here's just another example of that. And a couple images just kind of showing what you could do as a central green space. It could look a lot of different ways. This is just there to really inspire and create connections. Okay, so if you're going to have these great spaces and these new developments, you want to be able to make sure people can walk there and move in a variety of manners. And so what you see here is, number one, a representation of more of a build out of a street grid network, creating redundancy in your transportation network. These are public spaces that can leverage. You can leverage it for stormwater. You can leverage for connectivity. Taking advantage of. You can use it to help incentivize development. That's important. But also thinking about the extensive bicycle and roadway and pedestrian network. Obviously, you're looking at the kind of the Greenway plan right now, but all those ideas feed into this idea, especially what happens here. So again, this is a large area. So breaking it down to smaller nodes that people can connect to, really people will resonate with. And certainly this was a very popular idea. The other thing I want to say, I know it's been a long time coming, but as Ashford Dunwoody develops its multi-use trail and continues northward, our goal as part of this is to really kind of break that barrier between the east and west side of Ashford Dunwoody, and this can do that. So it's a really intentional effort to break down some of those physical barriers. This is one example. This is connecting kind of the Gold Kist Road up adjacent to MARTA up to Hammond Drive. This was actually a recommendation that also came in a parallel study that the Perimeter Community Improvement District did in and around the mall area, essentially running from the city boundaries and the Cox Enterprise campus eastward to Ashford Dunwoody. Pond also worked on that study with PCID and began taking some of those considerations around there. How do you think about the mall? How do you connect through the mall and kind of break down some of those barriers? This was also a recommendation of thinking about this connection. It's a short segment. It connects two kind of areas that I think we'll see redevelopment over time, and a way to kind of connect people to the MARTA station in another way. So again, taking advantage of transit and then incentivizing redevelopment over time. So I wanted to share that with you all as well. And here's that short little segment. It's not long, but could have tremendous positive impacts. And so that's something that's being kind of talked about. Again, obviously, as I mentioned, there's the path study ongoing, but this is certainly something to keep in mind and something that I think is very supportive of by the PCID as well. Next steps, and I'm done. One of the things we've highlighted in the plan is to have continued stakeholder consensus building. But one of the best ways you can do that is, first off, tell people about your success. I call it the state of the edge, but let's get people out there and talking about what's happening down here in a positive way, kind of build that regional focus and why this area is so vital to the region. Continued emphasis on developer tours and forums. Obviously, you've got Michael here and a great resource. And then visit and engage with, I'd say, other sister cities. What else are other people doing that have a similar makeup, composition, and story to Dunwoody in the Edge City area. Begin learning from best practices. You don't have to do it in a vacuum and reinvent the wheel. Take ideas and share your ideas, what you're doing. From a master plan effort, one of the things we've suggested, number one, is kind of these nodal master plans. This is a big area, so we're looking at a higher level, but to do a deeper dive maybe on certain areas of these nodes that we want to see further developed and further refined is one idea. MARTA and PCID is doing a TOD study looking at the Dunwoody MARTA station, how to activate that area further. So again, it's natural to participate in that study, but to kind of encourage that and maybe involved. One of the things we've suggested is looking at the zoning regulation that typically comes up when we talk about new development. So the first thing, a very easy first step is to do a diagnostic. Where are we? Where are the challenges? What works well? What doesn't? And then that gives you direction on how to move ahead. Zoning is complicated, and so before you jump into it, you have to kind of know, get a better framework of how to, what's the best path forward. The trail implementation is one, the Gold Kist path to Hammond is one that's a really easy win. And then obviously the park programming study, which is something kind of looking at these areas in and around these potential green spaces. If you begin programming them now, you're proactively helping and working with developers or other property owners and HOAs and people involved to say, this is what we want. So you're kind of building out that program. So with that, I'm happy to take questions. So.
All right. We'll start on Tom's end, if that's okay.
Thank you, Andrew. And I'm going to ask questions, and I don't know, Michael, who will be most appropriate to answer them. So just be on standby. So when you were talking about the increases in the population and the jobs, first of all, it's a pretty significant population increase. Obviously, the density you're adding. Two, I guess, questions on that. Is the increase in jobs, is there a presumption that the people that are moving into the area are also going to be working in the area? Are those completely independent of each other?
They're more connected. I mean, if they worked in tandem, they would be more connected, right? And so if you build a lot more office, but the residential didn't come, then you're going to have to bring people in from out of state. So they work together. But that's in theory, if it's successful and working generally as the build out we've shown the model, there would be more people living and working in Dunwoody.
Because obviously that's the ideal situation, that the people that are living there are working there, and that's not adding to the burden on the traffic and all those other things. Are there assumptions here as well? Is the with the target of the housing that's being added, that this is what demographic are we getting with the new housing? Are these young single workers? Are these retirees? Are these people? Are these families with children? Or is it a mix of all? And is there any presumptions built in there as well?
Yeah, it's hard to predict who's going to do it, but I think you can see what current trends are, let's say new development types. So there is a strong demand for people who want to downsize in a livable area. So we took that into account. When you're talking about the areas around State Farm and potential higher density, those are people, it's going to be a range of people. But a lot of times people maybe their first job and they want to move into a studio apartment, that kind of trend. But when they're here, as you've heard, people like to want to stay here. Where can they go? So again, their hope is to upward mobility and move into another part of Dunwoody and raise a family, or once you've raised your family, move back down. So there is a trend that would be the goal. We don't have specific demographic data. We didn't target certain groups, but that's generally what we're seeing in trends in the market. I don't know if you want to add to that too.
Yeah, and I'd also say there's sort of some levers we can mess with, right? If we want to. I mean, we came up with Ed City 2.0 as the way it is after a lot of debate and moving things. If we want to have more office, we may have to do some different things, but we could have more office and more employment and less residential. I think it's also about what we aggressively go after. This is not a static process where we've, there's visions out there and now we walk away and it happens. It's going to take a lot of aggressive approaching of property owners and new developers to constantly say, this is what we want. And these are the kinds of developments that we want. So if we want more senior, then we need to go after more senior, and we have to make it easier for them to get things done. So it's sort of both ways, right? We can be aggressive and go after what we want. But we certainly have talked about balancing out the market. Right now, in perimeter, 90% of residential is apartments, it's for rent, 10% is for sale. And we want to have a more balance. It's never going to be the other way, or it's never going to be probably 50-50, but it can be much more balanced than it is.
Okay, and you brought up the office space, which is a good segue into my next question. So I mean, before we started, we talked about, we knew this, you know, that there's a potential that by the end of the year, we could be 28% vacancy on the office space. Obviously, we know the impacts of the pandemic and how quick people may or may not be returning to office space, if we'll ever get a full return. And I know this plan is building, it was a 2.2 million square feet increase. So I guess, how do we reconcile that? And do we even know, or are we still in a wait and see mode? And then also, is that is part of that at, obviously it's a net gain, but is that because we're removing old office space, replacing it with new? What is that whole dynamic?
Let me see how to answer that one. It is a net gain. We don't have kind of to look into the future, it's hard to know 20 years down the way. 2.2 million sounds like a lot, but we're over 20 years. It will recycle. And so you're going to get in another 10 years, you're going to get a very different office environment. It's going to look different than what we are today. So again, but you have to remember too, we're introducing, you're drawing in more people. So even if more people are working from home, maybe half the time, you're still trying to draw in new industry and new people, right? You still want to bring that in. So there's going to be a net gain. It's actually, you already have a lot anyway. So the 2.2 sounds like a lot, and it is, but it is over 20 years. And so it's going to take, and right now it's going to look different. And what we're seeing in a lot of models of those old office buildings, and you can look downtown Atlanta, you know, look at Peachtree Center. They're trying to figure out what to do. It's going to look very different. It may be live work office below and a residential atop, a very different kind of mixed use, right? It may be a flex office space that looks differently. And we don't know what industries will come in here, right? And so again, the intentionality is what Michael and the city want to pursue will then dictate some of those levers and change. I hope that, yeah.
Yeah, and I would say, I would assume that office comes later. I
Right.
don't see a huge demand for brand new office, although Campus 244 leased up incredibly quickly.
Mhm.
And so you could see some more. We're probably going to see some older office either disappear, either being scraped and something new, or finding a new use for that. As an example, 2.2 is the 3 buildings that State Farm built. That's about 2.2 million square feet. So it is significant. I mean, it's on the aggressive side of what the consultants thought could happen. And we try to be realistic. This is not just let's choose a number. This is a realistic number, but it is on the aggressive side. What we probably are going to see is some smaller office, like High Street's building about 100,000 square feet of office, but it's small loft office for very small businesses. You're probably not going to see big 400,000 square foot office buildings come out of the ground anytime soon.
Okay. I just out of curiosity, in the economic impacts part, there was casino hotels.
That's just a terminology. It's like the standard, ignore that.
Okay. I didn't know if we're getting casinos in Dunwoody already.
No,
So.
we did not assume that it just includes all hotels.
Okay. Yeah.
It's a terminology thing in play. It's not, has nothing to do with what we're
Okay. All right. So in general, I just want to say these are more general comments. I understand the premise that all of this is built on. I've been engaged in this whole process since it started, and I largely am excited and agree with the vision. I guess the devil's in the details of how we actually, it's one thing to have a shiny, great plan. It's another thing is how do we actually do this? And so you talked about stakeholder engagement. At any point has that included, you know, we're not starting with a blank slate. We're not a bunch of, it's not farmland. This is, everything's built out. So is any of that stakeholder engagement included the existing property owners? Do we know where they are, what's their buy-in, what's their comfort level with us even having this discussion about their property?
I mean, you want.
Well, I will say they were included. They did interviews with many of them. But those that were not and future property owners, it really is on our shoulders now to make sure that these property owners understand this vision, that this is what we're looking for. That's already started. There have been, I think I mentioned, there's been a number of office buildings recently sold. We either have met with them or starting to meet with them. This is very much the beginning of the process. This is not the end. Gives us now a tool, and it hopefully gives all of you a tool to go out and tell people what we want.
And how do we, and I don't know if you have the answer, but I'm trying to figure out how do we implement this? So, you know, I know it's going to be done in stages. Obviously we're not going to tear down the whole perimeter and rebuild it, you know, over the next couple. But a lot of this depends on new street grids and so doing it incrementally is going to be challenging, to say the least. And again, I don't want to say that I don't share the vision. It's one thing to have a great plan. It's another thing, how do you implement it? And I think that's the more important part, is how do we, if this is what we want, how do we make it a reality? How do we incrementally do that? How do we plan for it? Do we have to preactively rezone? Do we have to, is that a part of this process, and how do we get there?
So if you want, the goal was for what you can do from the public side is to reduce barriers for redevelopment, or reduce barriers for change, right? We talked about some of these ideas here, and some of these feel nebulous, like, okay, we have to bring developers in or new property owners, but that's how you start. You really have to kind of create a common language and bring people in and do that. Zoning, yeah, well, zoning is one way to do it. We talk to developers, if you want a certain type of development, well, does your zoning code allow for it in this area? Does your character area and your comprehensive plan allow and actively name, we want some of these items? If I'm a developer, I don't know that, I'm coming from the outside, I look at that and I say, well, I can't do some of the things you want me to do. And you tell me this is what you want, but it's not aligned with your vision. So, and these are things that are like, you know, comprehensive plan amendments are made all the time, right? This is a vision. You would talk to the team to see how you would do that. Zoning code, like what's the barrier, right? Let's say to introduce stacked flats or anything like that, right? And kind of bring that in there. You start reducing those barriers and obstacles, and then introducing a very clear understanding of how this goes about. So you reduce unknowns. So you talk about the street grid, absolutely, but you already have a pretty good design guidelines. Michael does a great job with that. You continue to reinforce that and say, this is what we want. We think about the parks. So what we don't want is a developer comes along and says, hey, I gave you your 2 acres of park space, and you kind of look at it and you say, well, that's not what I wanted. I mean, I want an active playground, and you gave me a turf, you know, mowing, nothing going on. So you proactively plan for that, and you tell them what you want, and you make it very clear. So the expectations are known. I mean, those are just some ways you begin doing that. And you continue, it's a constant theme. It's a nonstop process of quarterly telling people what's going on, building momentum. And you create a tipping point where things start shifting and changing. Also, you need 1 or 2 of those calendar projects to really say, this is what we want to do and show change, which is why we talked about some of those ideas, those initiatives, whether it's a small spur trail, which really isn't that long and can be done. What does that do? Well, it connects point A to point B, Campus 244, which is built out, activates those amenities, connects you to transit, creates a better relationship with MARTA. You start thinking like, these are really good things. And yeah, there's a cost and investment, but we're not building 8 miles of trail, we're building a 1/4 mile. So doing little things like that, activating and breaking it down in chunks. This is a huge area. I keep reminding people it's a massive area. So you have to kind of, again, focus on those nodes, those small areas where you can kind of influence change and begin doing that. So I know this is high level. I know exactly what you're asking for, but it has been done. And I think it's you have a common theme and a message. And once this gets out there, people will be like, okay, this is where they want to go. Let's see what we can do. So.
And I know just one more thing, there's and I think Michael alluded to it a little bit earlier, where it's almost, you know, a chicken or egg, what's going to happen first, you know? And so I know a lot of this is based on the premise that we've seen a shift in the dynamic of who holds the cards in the workforce, right? It used to be, you wanted to work for a company, you went where they sent you. Now it's the new workforce is living where they want to live, and the companies are following the talent. And so I think that's the first step, I guess, is getting, or I may be wrong, creating a place where the talent wants to live, and then the business will follow. But so I guess for me, the important part of this is, again, I don't want to sound at all negative on this, because I'm excited about the vision. For me, the devil's in the details of how we execute it.
And the good news is it's not just talent, it's visitors. It's people who want the type of retail that they want. For the first time, all of that is sort of aligned. If you talk to office workers, this is the kind of environment where they want to work, but that's also where residents want to live. And it's where people, tourists want to come. So it's all together. It is going to be slow in some ways, sort of piecemeal. Good news is we've got 3 developments right now that are under construction that are basically this. Ashford Lane, Campus 244, and High Street, they all meet this. So I think once those get done, that there is a momentum to some of these developments when people see that. It's going to take a little bit of time. The housing is going to take probably the longest to hold the line on some property owners to say, we understand that apartments can make it, but the community needs other things. We need more of a balance. And we also have to acknowledge that we are going to have to grow in the core, which is sort of around MARTA and the mall. We're going to need more multifamily there. Over 20 years, we're going to need more multifamily for this to work, but we're also going to need more for sale really everywhere else in the market.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
One thing, again, I'd say you gotta start, like Michael said, you gotta start small, big area. So pick one. He said devil's in the details. Absolutely. Pick one and do it really well. So build on the momentum you've already done. You've got a core area, Campus 244 High Street, where it's starting to see some legs. Go continue to invest there and see what happens and make these connections. Not to say you shouldn't go across Ashford Dunwoody. You need to think about that, but kind of build on the nucleus and kind of say, I like that. If you spread yourself too thin and try to do too much too everywhere, you won't see the impact quickly. You'll lose some of that momentum. So,
And I think you said something similar to this, is that I think the important part of this plan is that it's not a static document. It's dynamic. We're constantly reevaluating, revisiting, adjusting as the market conditions change. Yeah.
And I don't think a recession is a good thing, but in downturns is when a lot of these things can happen. If you have a vision and you come out of a time when, if you bought a property 5-6 years ago and you invested this, it might be hard for you to make the changes that we really want you to make. But if somebody else buys it at a lower, investment, it might be easier for them. So timing is sort of on our side for some of these. But then some of it's going to take some investment from the city. We have to pick and choose some of the projects that we want to move on. And hopefully that will spur, the private sector to take the benefit as well.
Okay, thank you. Like I said, I'm excited to see where this takes us, and would appreciate knowing what it is that how we can best implement this to get it closer to reality. So thank you.
Rob?
I'll start with my easier questions, and I'll get probably into stuff that's outside the scope of your work as I go down. The economic impacts that's in present day dollars, correct?
correct.
Okay. Was there any estimate, or do we have any estimate? Tom kind of broached on this, and you all touched on this as well, of what sort of investment from the city this will take to guide or promote even just the ROM, so we know. I mean, if we're going to, hopefully the ROI will be greater than what we put in terms of tax dollars, but that I think is a useful number to have in mind.
We did not, as part of this, we were not scoped to really kind of do that. We didn't know
Sure.
what would come out to the fruition. So now that's really one of the next things you begin looking at, saying, hey, where are the best investments? You could look at that map and say there's 20 different parks, 15 different connections. I mean, where do you begin looking at that? My suggestion, as we've kind of tried to highlight, is say, let's start something small to see what the impact is, like a test case. I keep going back to my trail, but I like connection, but you pick something that you can kind of is reasonable, is doable, and start seeing the impacts and what the conversations are generated and created by. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can go here. Some of it's going to be private development driven too. We say we want a grid. Let's say the mall over years, we want to see some grid network. That's a private development in instituting that, not just, it's not the city going in and building that grid.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a partnership too. And that's what's not, it's hard to say, well, which is what? Well, we don't know yet.
Yeah,
You
what
have
kind
to
of
really
chicken
do
or
more.
egg, right?
Yeah.
Do we guide the private development, or do we spark the private development? Right.
It's a little bit of both, right? And that's why we have these little knobs we talked about at the beginning. What do you turn to kind of start the process? So you pick some things that are kind of low hanging fruits, whether it's do a diagnostic of the zoning. Where are we? Where do we continue to run into roadblocks? Or people have, the elected officials say, I have questions about this. Do a deeper dive there, pick off some of these things and begin promoting it. Those are really good, easy wins.
Next question I had is just if you could touch on maybe some of the transportation and transit assumptions that you made. This estimate is of about 15,000 more people into this area.
Mhm.
Are we assuming that the location of the transit and that the bike and the trails will be able to counteract all those additional people living there? Because the roads are already
Yeah.
pretty
Well,
much.
again, so first off, when we talk about a majority of those people, we focused a lot of the greater density, number one,
Mhm.
on in and around the MARTA station. Take advantage of what you've got. Obviously, the other thing to think about is we've tried to just with the grid plan is to say, the grid network really doesn't exist as much as you'd like, let's say.
Mhm.
When you build out the grid network, whether it's public or private investment, you build out redundancy. So you're expanding the road network, but getting greater movement, right? So your people are not locked into one way or two ways of moving. Third, we began thinking about this in kind of 4 quadrants. You could look at this area and really easily develop into 4 quadrants. Even, you go look at this, you kind of have a north, east, south, quadrants, begin breaking that up. If your goods and services are kind of provided in those areas, if people are living there, or maybe not be working there, but going to retail and doing those things, if you can break down the barriers of movement, so you can walk a quarter mile and grab something, then you'll start seeing transportation patterns change. I mean, it's not overnight, but you're kind of instituting that kind of as a kind of a cultural shift too. And people have historically not had that option. So you've got to give that option to them and make it very easy for them. It's not enough to build a multi-use trail. You got to have wayfinding and signs so people know where to go, right? It has to be distinctive and clear and easy and safe. So that's one of the other assumptions too, is to kind of be breaking these super area blocks out and making it much more connected. And again, people are still going to be driving to come to the mall regionally. That's not going to change. But again, hopefully we make it that much more easy for them to do it.
So sticking with transportation, and then well, I guess what kind of assumptions did you make in terms of connectivity to other parts of the city or other surrounding cities, especially to the east part of the city where you've got the village of Georgetown, or obviously Sandy Springs is literally right across the line. I guess, how did you look at that aspect?
I mean, we looked at a number of past plans, what they're looking at. I mean, there was conversations with PCID about how you connect to the Cox Enterprise Campus and build those gaps. There's options there. Everyone has to participate to do that, but there are ways to make those connections. To the east, there are some, it's challenging for road networks just because of the existing residential neighborhood, but there are some trail connections to the east that you can really take advantage of. They're on the screen now. I mean, they're very tiny, but you can kind of see them connect to the Georgetown area. And there's lots of discussions about the top end and what happens there and trail connectivity, but there are other areas to navigate eastward. So we did think about that. Ashford, Dunwoody being the major connection north and south, you're already doing work there. But thinking even long-term, how you get across the interstate, and then connecting down to Brookhaven. Brookhaven's got a path network. So we're thinking both about within the city, but also the adjacent boundaries of the city. So that's it's high level to be sure.
And I'd also add, Andrew mentioned the TOD study that PCID and MARTA are doing, which we'll be involved in. They're also going to update the LCI plan for the entire perimeter area. So we have our vision that we will put forward for that. And then it's like, okay, how do we make that vision that we want to build work with the entire perimeter market? So those types of connections between Sandy Springs and Dunwoody and Brookhaven need to be sort of hammered out there.
All right, and the last question I can almost guarantee is outside of the scope of your work, but I just want to hear your thoughts on it, both of you, while you're up here. And that's location of educational facilities. In one of these town nodes. If we're going to add 15,000 people, they're not all going to have kids, but there's no more trees to cut down at Dunwoody High School to expand there. So I think we need to put some thought into where we might try to guide the school district into.
We 100% agree. That was at a forefront. It came up a lot and we get that. I mean, we certainly understand. I think there's a great desire to continue the engagement and highlight the need for this. I mean, up until I can't speak. My takeaway from it is Now you have some hard data of where you want to go with your vision. You can put those numbers out and say, this is what's actually happening, before saying anecdotally, not that you were doing that, but hey, we're really getting, we're getting overcrowded. Now you can say, actually, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
We've discussed that a lot, how that's a difficult.
And I think that's one of the next steps is to sit down. This is our vision. This is what we're looking at over the next 20 years. We think it could happen. And there are a number of locations in perimeter where an education institution works. And they've probably not been this inexpensive in many years. So this is the time to do it.
No. Well, that's the questions I have for now. Thank you both for everything you've done to help put this together.
Catherine?
I appreciate having a vision to work toward, and I like this. It to suggest in the next 20 years we'll be increasing our population by 25% is daunting. My questions on housing, what we're seeing now presented to us are renter occupied only projects. What market forces need to change? What environment are we looking at economically to make owner occupied attractive?
Would you like me to answer that, Andrew?
Well, I mean, I'll let Michael add to that, but I think proactively pursuing, there are developers who do condominium developments. There are developers who do age restricted and quality development. You can point to them even around the perimeter. You have to go proactively find those and again, pursue those and make it clear. I mean, I know you will have said it. I know you guys have been championing that, but now it's written down saying this needs to shift. And so again, part of the parcel is actively going and pursuing that and saying this is the mix we need if we're going to, you have some leverage in that because you have where you want to go. You have a recognition that you're going to grow. I mean, there's no, I think the entire metro area is going to grow and you have to, that's the reality. So how do you balance, manage that change? But you have the leverage to ask for that. And there's going to be some tough conversations in the future to say, if we want that, again, I go back to what are the barriers you need to change? What makes it easier in the zoning to allow for that? And to Michael's point, when there's changes in the economy, like we're seeing with the office market and even potential mild recession or a dip, take advantage of that to kind of say we need to really shift our focus. And that seems like a general answer, but there's a lot of moving parts with that.
No, I appreciate that we can be proactive. So
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd say 20 years is a long time. And just because right now, one type of development and apartments, I think, has been for many years, the easy to do, private equity understands it, you build it, you can sell it, it's been very easy. There are, especially in town, a growing group of developers who are building really quality, not just townhomes, but also stacked flats and sort of interesting, unique product. And we need to go and bring those people here and put them together with property owners or get them to buy property and really sell it. But it's going to be difficult. It's going to be a long, I think, term struggle to sort of hold the line and say, no, in certain areas, we don't need a single new apartment. We've got enough. We need for sale of all types.
yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Joe?
Thanks. Hey, thank you so much. It's all about actions, strategic implementation actions and follow-up. So thank you so much. It's a plan. It's plan, execute, analyze. Plan, execute, analyze. So I think we'll go, I'd like to see next step. You can go back to your slide, the next step action, just to kind of summarize next steps. I think what I'd like to see is more like, okay, if it's a quarterly check-in or a semi-annual check-in, it's sort of like we have a plan with some milestones on there, putting a little more dates and metrics and specifics on that to move forward on there. I think the idea about engaging our development authority, what role does that have, right? The City of Atlanta, Invest Atlanta purchased a 46-story office building at 2 Peachtree Street, downtown Atlanta. The development authority bought that, right? They're going to convert it into residential, right? So it's an adaptive reuse. So how do we engage our development authority? Do we need to create another authority? Yada, yada. I'd like to hear more about that on next steps. I'd like to hear more about specific zoning that we could or should redo and undertake, like a little bit like we did on the village, right? If it's the best, how they can, like you say, remove barriers from a government, that we can do that. I just have this, I'm a favor, any green space that we have in the plan, I would prefer that the aspirational is that it is publicly owned.
Understood.
Versus I know there's Avalon, there's these things, but at the end of the day, those are privately owned and so on. There's this debate. It's kind of a, where are you coming from perspective, but I believe it's a publicly owned use of green space, then I think that's benefit for all the public versus a private entity saying, well, sorry, you can't use it for these hours because we have something else going on. I thank you for, shouting back out to the Path Foundation. Obviously, we're looking at incorporating their path plan of looking at the PCID's former trail plan. I appreciate the call out about activating the Dunwoody MARTA station at that ground level, right? This is that whole adaptive reuse. Right, we can have 36 things going on and they can all contribute to the big picture, right? So again, backing into a strategic implementation plan of okay, what are we going to do in 2023, 24, et cetera. But yeah, not just sitting on the shelf, this aspiration, but yeah, how are we going to implement that? I'd like to see examples potential of other city investment. There's the carrot and the stick. So if there's other carrots that the city can offer aside from rezoning, be nice to hear about those things. What other incentives? I know we have our development authority, et cetera, but yeah, what other things we can do there as well. And I definitely would like to hear more about that. The office to, I'm going to call it owner occupied conversion versus multifamily conversion, but I really love to hear more about that. And on the economic impact, I'd also like to hear about, because we really, I'd love to see come to fruition a light rail or BRT as a minimum across the top end of 285. And I think that would also greatly spur economic impact in our area because look, face it, it's MARTA, but it only goes, 2 more stops north. It doesn't get people to really come that live further away to work here. That the east-west is so woefully inadequate for MARTA across the top end. So I'd love to see, where we flying with that there. So I guess there's more comments than, but you mentioned in your study, property value created 1.8 billion. Well, High Street, just phase 1 is 2 billion private investment in there. So I think that's a low number. Property value created 1.8 billion. I think that's on the low side myself. I just am going to be optimistic, glasses half full. And it does, you mentioned a 20-year, but a 30-year, the ARC region is going to grow 51%, right? And over 50 years. And DeKalb County is going to grow 277,000 people are going to move here additional to DeKalb County. So even if you pull out 10% of that into Dunwoody, that's 27,000 more people by 2050. So there's going to be more people here. So I'd like to hear about workforce housing as well, reducing vehicle miles traveled, workforce housing, because we want people working where they live. So anyway, thanks a lot. I'm looking forward to that.
Well, we appreciate that. And everyone said, what's the devil in the details? You said that. And I'm a designer by trade, so I hate plans. This on the shelf, it irritates me. But I know Michael and those guys, we're not here to do a plan. We really want to take incremental steps and do that. And we've talked about what are those quarterly next steps. There's some baby steps, very incremental, but you're going to see some good stuff come from the staff. So,
Hey, John, you're.
Thank you. I appreciate the efforts. I appreciate the presentation. I do appreciate the citizens coming and giving feedback, and as well as members of council that have already spoke. I agree with pretty much almost everything that was said. I really appreciate Mr. Starling's comments regarding owner occupied. I think that is an important piece that this city council and all the city councils prior, we have pushed for we have scaled back and really approved nothing when it comes to multifamily rental units in the city of Dunwoody. We put something for senior housing and that may or may not happen. I don't know, it's in the works. But as far as multifamily rental, zero. We'd love to get condos. No condo has been built in 15 years. No stacked flats have been built in 15 years. So this is a 20-year plan, but in the last 15, I haven't seen a whole lot of moving the way in which we're talking. And I'd love to see some movement. We have done some townhomes. We have, again, tried to keep the owner occupied rental 50-50 mix. We have High Street. High Street is zoned for both condos and apartments. So far, I'm not seeing any plans hit our books when it comes to condos. They're pushing only apartments. So I like your plan. I like the ideas. We need to plan for the future. But as far as I'm concerned, we need to look at ways in which to foster people who currently live in single family houses to be able to stay here. And right now, we as a council, we as a city have done a really poor job of that, except for the townhomes, which are numerous levels that you might have to walk the stairs. So I'm looking for changes. I'm looking for owner occupied. I'm looking for stacked flats and condos. And so far I haven't seen it, but I'm hopeful that that will be coming in the near future. And if this planning and the talking with the developers can make that happen, please do so. Thank you.
So, yeah, Mr. Fain, I know you want to say something.
Sure. Are you able to hear me, Andrew Gore?
No, not at all.
How about right now?
No.
No. You've gotten worse.
My apologies.
We'll
Go
keep it
ahead,
on-
Andrew. I'll let you speak then to it.
You can text one of your colleagues and they
Text
can read it.
Jonathan, We'll repeat.
And
what
he
we
can
said.
read it if you
There
text
you
your
go.
colleague.
Yeah, why don't we? Yeah,
Right.
I know.
Yeah, try that. All right. So,
Can I answer?
oh yeah, sorry.
One of the things.
Right, and we-
About for sale housing and one of the things that we've talked about a lot with all of this is to get for sale housing, you have to have a certain type of place. People will rent an apartment in the middle of a mall parking lot. So they're not going to buy a condo there. So it's the environment around it. So it's all of these investments with your street, what it looks like, amenities around it, places you can walk to. So that is some of where we're headed. And so the chicken and egg is sort of, it's true. But I do think that developers are starting to look at sort of a suburb like ours a little differently, where they might be willing to do some of the stack lighting. And they're not going to be 300, right? There might be 50, there might be 60 or 90 smaller units on smaller lots in a mixed use environment. That's all.
If I may.
Yeah, for sure.
There was comment earlier about conversion of used or vacant office buildings into residential. Tonight, 64 and 66 Perimeter Center East, 64 is a 15-story building right along 285. What I've asked you, I think this previously, we've talked about this. I just want to make sure that I ask you again. How would that be converted into residential? Is it possible? Is it likely? Is the building construction for office only? How hard would it be to convert that type of business or that type of building into a residential type facility?
Obviously, I'm not an expert. It has a lot to do with the size of the building and the depth of
And
the
the
building.
plumbing.
What happens in deep buildings is you have the core and you go into your condo, and then it's a long condo and there's light at the very end for one room, but not the other.
Right.
But some of our older buildings, so that one may not, I'm not positive about that. I think one of the things we should do is maybe have a meeting and bring some architects together and let's talk.
What
about
happened with
different-
or bring in Urban Land Institute, ULI?
Yeah, we could do that. I mean, those.
About-
we
And not
got
just
in-
us either. There's other cities that are really
everybody's
interested.
talking about,
Right.
adaptive reuse. Some of our older buildings, I think could work. That one, I'm not sure. It's a pretty deep, big building.
So one of the things that happened in Dunwoody, which most of council's probably really aware of, is that before we were a city, DeKalb had in their zoning ordinance that any 5-story or below office building, or am I saying it wrong? 3, whatever it was, they were small office buildings, 2-story office buildings that could 5-story apartment buildings. So in Dunwoody, whatever inventory we had of those kind of buildings, which I think are going to prove the easiest to convert or an easier path to conversion, they're gone. Because I think in Tucker, they actually have approved tearing down most of an office park, but keeping building apartments from new, but also converting one building, I think. We'll see if it happens. But yeah, it's an interesting situation. Go ahead.
And just for observation too, is creating that environment, like Michael, you just said about if you're going to put condos, people need to have that sense of why am I going to live here? I just spent a week in New York, Manhattan, of course, but whatever. But I run the mileage. It's that perspective. There is, if I go from the mall over to the Meridian Hotel, that's a half a mile. And in Manhattan, there is no way in heck I'm going to take a taxi. I'm going to walk it. It's a 10-minute walk. And if we know we're successful, we can have a measurement of outcome. We'll know we're successful when we don't need a shuttle and people don't need to think about going in their car to get to the mall if they're staying at Le Meridian, that it's safe, inviting, and we have that super blocks have been subdivided in a street grid, and we create that environment. That's really a measurable outcome of what we should be aspiring to.
So on the ownership part, Michael Starling and I have met with a few condo developers. If you don't know, housing is going to be a big subject at the state legislature this session. And I was speaking to our legislature, one of our legislators yesterday, who said if the governor was going to invest in infrastructure for Dunwoody so you could be more dense, and I made the point that we're probably outside of Atlanta, we're probably the most, for sure we're the most dense of any suburban city. There's no doubt. So I made that point, what would it be? And I said, I don't really know. You can't put me on the spot like that, but there's some inherent infrastructure issues with this whole plan. And it's not, the fact DeKalb can't grow by 300,000 people. They don't have sewer capacity for 50,000 more people. And there was a lot at our meeting this weekend, there was a lot of talk about these super sites where the governor's recruiting in these big corporations to build factories and then has to get people there to work. And the cities have septic. They don't even have sewer yet. And a sewer plant was what somebody told us $30 million to build. 3 years ago, it would have been 15. And so I think that as we go through this process, we have to start looking at the infrastructure issues. What's our sewage situation? What's our water situation in the region, not just us? And I'm part of a group of mayors and county commissioners all over the region that are talking about these things because these are big questions. Yes, the projections say we're going to grow by this much, but what does that really look like? And what does it mean for the region? And the housing questions are the same, right? We don't want more of the same of what we have. We have enough of that. And while nobody would buy a condo in the mall parking lot today, Avalon has condos and $1 million townhomes essentially in a mall parking lot. And they were all built simultaneously. And maybe that's why it works. Some of them literally face a Chick-fil-A. It's a dynamic I totally don't understand, but it's working. And so it's working. And so how do we get the products? That's going to be a big question as we go forward. How do we get the products we need to diversify our housing base? And that does need to include some workforce housing, right? We need to figure out what that looks like for Dunwoody. We have tons of service jobs. We're fortunate. I think we already know the closer you are to MARTA, the easier it is to get employees. All over the region, people are struggling. That's probably not going to change either. So I think as we look for things, we need to be looking at infrastructure and what that looks like. I am extremely pro-transit. I will tell you that in Metro Atlanta, a big part of the solution to the housing crisis is transit because we've got to build housing and let people get to where job centers are. We have to build housing where the land is affordable. But MARTA, there was just a report today that MARTA's ridership is down 60% from like a decade ago. And so and I'm pro MARTA. There's some big questions that we have to ask. We orient our success around MARTA. And I think the people that work right around MARTA and potentially will live right around MARTA may be using MARTA, but something's not working in terms of transit today. I have spent the last 5 years working on we're not calling it bus transit anymore, rapid transit across the top end. It'll be a decade or more before it's built out because of how they're going to build the top and managed lanes. But those are all pieces of a puzzle that we have to figure out. On your next steps, I don't want to work with MARTA. I'm just telling you that. I like MARTA and I like the people there, but we're pretty good at densifying the area around the MARTA station on our own. They do some things I don't like. They build a lot of parking in their transit orient development so far. They have a lot of parking. And so we've already shown with an office building and a hotel sharing a parking lot that it can be done to reduce parking. And so I think we are good on, and I'm not really territorial, but I'm a little territorial about that property over there. So my questions are, the buildings we're talking about, other building that sold, they're on the other side of Ashford Dunwoody Road from the mall, correct? Yes. And we talk about two perimeters, but I'm wondering, one of this, you said we have virtually no empty retail space, which means our retail landowners are doing really well. It also probably means the tenants are doing really well, whatever that means in this market. So what is it, and you'll have to answer today, Michael, but what is it that we need to be looking at with this potential opportunity on the other side of Ashford Dunwoody Road to enhance it? Does the Buck, in Buckhead, they have one loop shuttle as opposed to every building. Is that a game changer for office buildings? Would that be a game changer for just redevelopment? Because I think where we're going to face the first line of potential meaningful redevelopment is on that side of Ashford Dunwoody. And so you don't have to answer today. This is a process, but it's something to think about. What is it working with PCID or whoever that we need to be thinking about short-term and long-term, midterm and long-term about that side of Ashford Dunwoody Road? Because the malls, there's so much potential to redevelop even the parking lots at the mall. And we have to work with them, but it's the best performing mall in Georgia, I think, or it was in December. And High Street's coming online and Campus 244 is doing great. And if a corporation came in tomorrow and they wanted to build from scratch, we'd be in the running on that side, the mall side of Ashford Dunwoody. But what do we do about the other side? What government investment might be needed? What private investment might need it? How do we make it fit? Again, you don't have to answer today, but I actually think that's today, like the most important part of the plan. That's just my perspective.
It's certainly an area we talked probably
Right,
most
right,
about, and
right.
it is the most likely to change.
Right.
And it is changing the valuation.
Right.
What's happening there. And a lot of what's in the plan, what we're talking about is just implementing that more streetscapes, more parks,
Right.
green space. But it's also working with those property owners.
Right.
This is what we want.
Right. And right.
And that's where for sale housing would probably happen.
Right. But then we also still need to make it so that you can walk comfortable, what you said, to Park Place Shopping Center and have dinner. Well, not at Alon's anymore, but at Cafe Intermezzo or something. And so I think that to me is almost the most critical part of this, is an opportunity that 3 years ago we didn't know we were going to have. I don't even think 2 years ago we kind of knew what was happening. So anybody have any other questions? We look forward to continuing to work on this, and a reminder that this is not happening overnight, that even the population growth that Joe referred to, which is 25 or more years off 2050, I think is what you said. 30. I mean, that this is long term. This is long term, and who knows? But thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you for having the time and being so inquisitive. This is how things change. Thank you.
Appreciate it. And just to let you know, the final report is being worked on. So you're going to get a nice big 240-page document that you can read at your leisure. You don't have to read-
Electronically?
Yeah, you don't have to read the whole thing, but
Please, no paper. Is that what you're
yeah,
saying,
but
Councilman
that will
Lottbacher?
be done very soon. And it's
Okay.
got it's a lot easier to sort of comprehend the first 50, 60, 70 pages. So thank you.
Okay. All right. Next is